Alrighty. Welcome back to Mecha Mondays. I am your intrepid pilot, Fragath, and today we're doing more of Starship Troopers, the not necessarily the first work that had powered armor in it of science fiction, but certainly one of the first to really codify its use in a modern military setting, or at least post-World War II um, setting. So previously on, it's been boot camp at the mobile infantry. For the mobile infantry? For the mobile infantry. Um, it's a lot. it's pretty brutal, which to the point that Johnny makes is very much intentional. It's not needlessly cruel. It's cruelty with a point. They don't want to burn resources on somebody who just is half-assing it, which I guess makes a lot of sense from their perspective, depending on what their funding situation looks like. I'm not sure we ever really get a good look at that, unfortunately. Um, we also get our first taste of how the mobile infantry deals with corporal punishment and dealing with people who break the rules, which is corporal punishment. In this case, lashes, and the individual in question was lucky. In fact, you do get the strong sense that the person who, so a guy, not Captain Frankel. Frankel's the one overseeing. What's his name? Oh, good work. Hendricks? I think it's Hendricks. This guy named Hendricks winds up during boot camp training being told, throw yourself prone on the ground, and he's on top of a bunch of fire ants. And he jumps up and is like, oh god, fire ants. And then drill instructor Zim walks over and smacks him. And then Hendricks, pretty sure it's Hendrick, not Hendricks, Hendricks singular. Hendrick then smacks him back. But Zim does not tell the superior officer, who's a captain, that Hendrick had hit him. So it's like Zim's like trying to give the guy another chance to reduce his punishment because striking a superior officer is often dealt with in death. Basically, the entire episode is to say they take the rules very seriously, um, which I guess makes sense in their context. I would imagine you'd have to, so that you listen to the person above you without thinking too hard, or whatever excellent reason that they have for that, um, or just a general level of trust that people are going to follow the rules, which might be the point. Is like, oh, this is teaching you the value of having rules, so and following them. So in this section upcoming, we have a little bit more boot camp. We have another glimpse at the powered armor, which is honestly the entire reason we're reading it. But then a big chunk of this is going to be some character development, learning about Johnny and his world, but more importantly, the it's going to be a nice episode of Starship Troopers Philosophy 101. Um, some of which is actually pretty interesting. It makes sense in context, mostly. Um, I don't know that it works in our context necessarily, and I'm not sure I agree with everything raised, but there's some ideas there. This is going to probably be a shortish one. They're all shortish ones because it's a Monday and I'm tapped out on Mondays. Not because they are Mondays, but because they come after Sunday and I work my tail off on Sundays. Anyway, oh geez, where's the next chapter break on that? Wow, that just keeps on going. Oh, because that's the okay. So there's some pretty baller action scenes later in this, and that's what I'm stuck in, trying to figure out where I'm at. There we go. Yeah, that'll probably do it. Anyway, now we get on to chapter. What chapter are we up to? Roman numeral 6. of Starship Troopers. Each chapter starts with a quote. I'm sure people have twigged to that already. A bunch of them have been religious quotes. Some of them are going to be other person quotes. Alrighty, give me one sec to hydrate again, and we'll get cracking. I had some other salient point I wanted to make, but I can't remember what it was. I don't know. Okay, that's good. I'm so sorry. Well, stop wasting your time. Chapter 6. What we obtain too cheap, we esteem too lightly. It would be strange indeed if so celestial an article as freedom should not be highly rated. Thomas Paine. It was the night after Hendrik was kicked out that I reached my lowest slump at Camp Curry. I couldn't sleep, and you have to have been through boot camp to understand just how far down a recruit has to sink before that can happen. But I hadn't had any real exercise all day, so I wasn't physically tired, and my shoulders still hurt even though I had been marked duty, and I had that letter from my mother preying on my mind, and every time I closed my eyes I could hear that crack and see Ted slump against the whipping post. I wasn't fretted about losing my boot chevrons. That no longer mattered at all, because I was ready to resign, determined to. If it hadn't been the middle of the night and no pen and paper handy, I would have done so right then. Ted had made a bad mistake, one that lasted all of half a second. And it really had been just a mistake, too, because while he hated the outfit, who liked it? He had been trying to sweat it out and win his franchise. He meant to go into politics. He talked a lot about how, when he got his citizenship, there'll be some changes made. You wait and see. Well, he would never be in public office now. He had taken his finger off his number for a single instant, and he was through. If it could happen to him, it could happen to me. Suppose I slipped, next day or next week, not even allowed to resign, but drummed out with my back striped. Time to admit that I was wrong and Father was right. Time to put in that little piece of paper and slink home and tell Father that I was ready to go to Harvard and then go to work in the business, if he would still let me. Time to see Sergeant Zim first thing in the morning and tell him that I had had it. But not until morning, because you don't wake Sergeant Zim except for something you're certain that he will class as an emergency. Believe me, you don't. Not Sergeant Zim. Sergeant Zim. He worried me as much as Ted's case did. After the court-martial was over and Ted had been taken away, he stayed behind and said to Captain Frankel, "May I speak with the battalion commander, sir?" "Certainly. I was intending to ask you to stay behind for a word. Sit down." Zim flicked his eyes my way, and the captain looked at me, and I didn't have to be told to get out. I faded. There was nobody in the outer office, just a couple of civilian clerks. I didn't dare go outside because the captain might want me. I found a chair back of a Okay, I see what he's doing. Cadence threw me, sorry. I found a chair back of a row of files and sat down. I could hear them talking through the partition I had my head against. BHQ was a building rather than a tent, since it housed permanent communication and recording equipment. But it was a minimum field building, a shack. The inner partitions weren't much. I doubt the civilians could hear as they each were wearing transcriber phones and were bent over typers. Besides, they didn't matter. I didn't mean to eavesdrop. Well, maybe I did. Zim said, "Sir, I request transfer to a combat team." Frankel answered, "I can't hear you, Charlie. My tin ear is bothering me again." Zim, I'm quite serious, sir. This isn't my sort of duty. Frankel said testily, "Quit bellyaching your troubles to me, Sergeant. At least wait until we've disposed of duty matters. What in the world happened?" Zim said stiffly, "Captain, that boy doesn't rate 10 lashes." Frankel answered, "Of course he doesn't. You know who goofed, and so do I." "Yes, sir, I know." "Well, you know even better than I do that these kids are wild animals at this stage. You know when it's safe to turn your back on them and when it isn't. You know the doctrine and the standing orders about Article 9080. You must never give them a chance to violate it. Of course, some of them are going to try it. If they weren't aggressive, they wouldn't be material for the MI. They're docile in ranks. It's safe enough to turn your back when they're eating, or sleeping, or sitting on their tails and being lectured. But get them out in the field in a combat exercise, or anything that gets them keyed up and full of adrenaline, and they're as explosive as a hatful of mercury fulminate. You know that. All you instructors know that. You're trained. Trained to watch for it. Trained to snuff it out before it happens. Explain to me how it was possible for an untrained recruit to hang a mouse on your eye. He should never have laid a hand on you. You should have knocked him cold when you saw what he was up to. So why weren't you on the bounce? Are you slowing down?" "I don't know," Zim answered slowly. "I guess I must be." If true, a combat team is the last place for you. But it's not true, or wasn't true the last time you and I worked out together 3 days ago. So what slipped?" Zim was slow in answering. "I think I had him tagged in my mind as one of the safe ones." "There are no such." "Yes, sir. But he was so earnest, so doggedly determined to sweat it out. He didn't have any aptitude, but he kept on trying, that I must have done that subconsciously." Zim was silent, then added, "I guess it was because I liked him." Frankel snorted. "An instructor can't afford to like a man." "I know it, sir, but I do. They're a nice bunch of kids. We've dumped all the real twerps by now. Hendrick's only shortcoming, aside from being clumsy, was that he thought he knew all the answers. I didn't mind that. I knew it all at that age myself. I knew it all at that age myself. The twerps have gone home, and those that are left are eager, anxious to please, and on the bounce, as cute as a litter of collie pups. A lot of them will make soldiers." "So that was the soft spot. You liked him, so you failed to clip him in time. So he winds up with a cord and the whip in a BCD. Sweet." Zim said earnestly, "I wish to heaven there were some way for me to take that flogging myself, sir." "You'd have to take your turn. I outrank you. What do you think I've been wishing the past hour? What do you think I was afraid of from the moment I saw you come in here with sporting a shiner? I did my best to brush it off with administrative punishment, and the young fool wouldn't let well enough alone. But I never thought he would be crazy enough to blurt out that he had hung one on you. He's stupid. You should have eased him out of the outfit weeks ago, instead of nursing him along until he got into trouble. But blurt it out he did, to me, in front of witnesses, forcing me to take official notice of it. And that licked us. No way to get it off the record, no way to avoid a court. Just go through the whole dreary mess and take our medicine, and wind up with one more civilian who'll be against us the rest of his days. Because he has to be flogged. Neither you nor I can take it from him, even though the fault was ours. Because the regiment has to see what happens when 9080 is violated. Our fault, but his lumps." "My fault, Captain. That's why I want to be transferred. Sir, I think it's best for the outfit." "You do, eh? But I decide what's best for my battalion, not you, Sergeant. Charlie, who do you think pulled your name out of the hat? And why? Think back 12 years. You were a corporal, remember? Where were you?" "Here, you know quite well, Captain. Right here on this same godforsaken prairie, and I wish I had never come back to it." "Don't we all? But it happens to be the most important and the most delicate work in the army, turning unspanked young cubs into soldiers. Who was the worst unspanked young cub in your section?" Zim answered slowly. I wouldn't go so far as to say you were the worst, Captain. You wouldn't, eh? But you'd have to think hard to name another candidate. I hated your guts, Corporal Zim. Zim sounded surprised and a little hurt. You did, Captain? I didn't hate you. I rather liked you. So? Well, hate is the other luxury an instructor can never afford. We must not hate them, we must not like them, we must teach them. But if you liked me then, it seemed to me that you had very strange ways of showing it. Do you still like me? Don't answer that. I don't care whether you do or not. Or, rather, I don't want to know, whichever it is. Never mind. I despised you then, and I used to dream about ways to get you. But you were always on the bounce and never gave me a chance to buy a 9080 a quart of my own. Sorry. But you were always on the bounce and never gave me a chance to buy a 9080 quart of my own. So here I am, thanks to you. Now to handle your request. You used to have one order that you gave to me over and over again when I was a boot. I got so I loathed it almost more than anything else you did or said. Do you remember it? I do, and now I'll give it back to you. Soldier, shut up and soldier. Yes, sir. Don't go yet. This weary mess isn't all loss. Any regiment of boots needs a stern lesson in the meaning of 9080, as we both know. They haven't yet learned to think, they won't read, and they rarely listen, but they can see. And young Hendrick's misfortune may save one of his mates some day from swinging by the neck until he's dead, dead, dead. But I'm sorry the object lesson had to come from my battalion, and I certainly don't intend to let this battalion supply another one. You get your instructors together and warn them. For about 24 hours those kids will be in a state of shock. They'll turn sullen, and the tension will build. Along about Thursday or Friday, some boy who's about to flunk out anyhow will start thinking over the fact that Hendrick didn't get so very much, not even the number of lashes for drunken driving. And he's going to start brooding that it might be worth it to take a swing at the instructor he hates most. Sergeant, that blow must never land. Understand me? Which I think is a kind of interesting little tidbit there about they deal out lashes for drunken driving, which is a little scary. It's the little things. So we get the sense we live in a rather different society here. Yes, sir. I want them to be 8 times as cautious as they have been. I want them to keep their distance. I want them to have eyes in the backs of their heads. I want them to be as alert as a mouse at a cat show. Bronsky, you have a special word with Bronsky. He has a tendency to fraternize. I'll straighten Bronsky out, sir. See that you do. Because when the next kid starts swinging, it's got to be stop-punched, not muffled like today. The boy has got to be knocked cold, and the instructor must do so without ever being touched himself, or I'll damned well break him for incompetence. Let them know that. They've got to teach those kids that it's not merely expensive, but impossible to violate 9080, that even trying it wins a short nap, a bucket of water in the face, and a very sore jaw. And nothing else. Yes, sir. It'll be done. It had better be done. I will not only break the instructor who slips, I will personally take him way out on the prairie and give him lumps, because I will not have another one of my boys strung up to that whipping post through sloppiness on the part of his teachers. Dismissed. Yes, sir. Good afternoon, Captain. What's good about it? Charlie? Yes, sir. If you're not too busy this evening, why don't you bring your soft shoes and your pads over to Officers' Row, and we'll go waltzing Matilda. Say about 8 o'clock? Yes, sir. That's not an order, that's an invitation. If you really are slowing down, maybe I'll be able to kick your shoulder blades off. Would the captain care to put a small bet on it? Huh? With me sitting here at this desk getting swivel chair spread? I will not. Not unless you agree to fight with 1 foot in a bucket of cement. Seriously, Charlie, we've had a miserable day, and it's going to be worse before it gets better. If you and I work up a good sweat and swap a few lumps, maybe we'll be able to sleep tonight despite all of Mother's little darlings. I'll be there, Captain. Don't eat too much dinner. I need to work off a couple of matters myself. I'm not going to dinner. I'm going to sit right here and sweat out this quarterly report, which the regimental commander is graciously pleased to see right after his dinner, and which somebody whose name I won't mention has put me 2 hours behind on, so I may be a few minutes late for our waltz. Go away now, Charlie, and don't bother me. See you later. Sergeant Zim left so abruptly that I barely had time to lean over and tie my shoe, and thereby be out of sight behind the file case as he passed through the outer office. Captain Frankel was already shouting, "Orderly! Orderly! Orderly! Do I have to call you 3 times? What's your name? Put yourself down for an hour's extra duty, full kit. Find the company commanders of E, F, and G my compliments, and I'll be pleased to see them before parade. Then bounce over to my tent and fetch me a clean dress uniform, cap, sidearms, shoes, ribbons. No medals. Lay it out. No medals. Lay it out for me here. Then make afternoon sick call. If you can scratch with that arm, as I've seen you doing, your shoulder can't be too sore. You've got 13 minutes until sick call. On the bounce, soldier." I made it by catching 2 of them in the senior instructor's shower, an orderly can go anywhere, and the third at his desk. The orders you get aren't impossible, they merely seem so because they nearly are. I was laying out Captain Frankel's uniform for parade as sick call sounded. Without looking up, he growled, "Belay that extra duty. Dismissed." So I got home just in time to catch extra duty for uniform, untidy in, 2 particulars, and see the sickening end of Tim Hendrick's time in the MI. So I had plenty to think about as I lay awake that night. I had known that Sergeant Zim worked hard, but it had never occurred to me that he could possibly be other than completely and smugly self-satisfied with what he did. He looked so smug, so self-assured, so at peace with the world and with himself. The idea that this invincible robot could feel that he had failed, could feel so deeply and personally disgraced that he wanted to run away, hide his face among strangers, and offer the excuse that his leaving would be best for the outfit, shook me up as much, and in a way even more, than seeing Ted flogged. To have Captain Frankel agree with him, as to the seriousness of the failure, I mean, and then rub his nose in it, chew him out, well, I mean, really, sergeants don't get chewed out. Sergeants do the chewing. A law of nature. But I had to admit that what Sergeant Zim had taken and swallowed was so completely humiliating and withering as to make the worst I had ever heard or overheard from a sergeant sound like a love song. And yet the captain hadn't even raised his voice. "Sorry. I didn't know he didn't raise his voice. He spoke in italics for a bunch of it, so I thought he was shouting a little. My bad." The whole incident was so the whole incident was so preposterously unlikely that I was never even tempted to mention it to anyone else. And Captain Frankel himself, officers we didn't see very often. They showed up for evening parade, sauntering over at the last moment and doing nothing that would work up a sweat. They inspected once a week, making private comments to sergeants, comments that invariably meant grief for somebody else, not them, and they decided each week what company had won the honor of guarding the regimental colors. Aside from that, they popped up occasionally on surprise inspections, creased, immaculate, remote, and smelling faintly of cologne, and went away again. Oh, 1 or more of them did always accompany us on route marches, and twice Captain Frankel had demonstrated his virtuosity at La Savate. But officers didn't work, not real work, and they had no worries because sergeants were under them, not over them. But it appeared that Captain Frankel worked so hard that he skipped meals, was kept so busy with something or other that he complained of lack of exercise, and would waste his own free time just to work up a sweat. As for Voorhees, he had honestly seemed to be even more upset at what had happened to Hendrik than Zim had been. And yet he hadn't even known Hendrik by sight. He had been forced to ask his name. I had an unsettling feeling that I had been completely mistaken as to the very nature of the world I was in, as if every part of it was something wildly different from what it appeared to be. Like discovering that your own mother isn't anyone you've ever seen before, but a stranger in a rubber mask. But I was sure of one thing. I didn't even want to find out what the MI really was. If it was so tough that even the gods that be, sergeants and officers, were made unhappy by it, it was certainly too tough for Johnny. How could you keep from making mistakes in an outfit you didn't understand? I didn't want to swing by my neck till I was dead, dead, dead. I didn't even want to risk being flogged, even though the doctor stands by to make certain it doesn't do you any permanent injury. Nobody in our family had ever been flogged, except paddlings at school, of course, which isn't at all the same thing. There were no criminals in our family on either side, none who had even been accused of crime. None who had even been accused of crime, sorry. We were a proud family. The only thing we lacked was citizenship, and father regarded that as no real honor, a vain and useless thing. But if I were flogged, well, he'd probably have a stroke. And yet Hendrik hadn't done anything that I hadn't thought about doing 1,000 times. Why hadn't I? Timid, I guess. I knew that those instructors, any one of them, could beat the tar out of me, so I had buttoned my lip and hadn't tried it. No guts, Johnny. At least Ted Hendrik had had guts. I didn't have. And a man with no guts has no business in the army in the first place. Besides that, Captain Frankel hadn't even considered it to be Ted's fault. Even if I didn't buy a 9080 through lack of guts, what day would I do something other than a 9080, something not my fault, and wind up slumped against the whipping post anyhow? Time to get out, Johnny, while you're still ahead. My mother's letter simply confirmed my decision. I had been able to harden my heart to my parents as long as they were refusing me, but when they softened, I couldn't stand it. Or when Mother softened, at least. She had written, "But I am afraid I must tell you that your father will still not permit your name to be mentioned. But, dearest, that is his way of grieving, since he cannot cry. You must understand, my darling baby, that he loves you more than life itself, more than he does me, and that you have hurt him very deeply. He tells the world that you are a grown man, capable of making your own decisions, and that he is proud of you. But that is his own pride speaking, the bitter hurt of a proud man who has been wounded deep in his heart by the one he loves best. You must understand, Juanito, that he does not speak of you, and has not written to you, because he cannot. Not yet, not till his grief becomes bearable. When it has, I will know it, and then I will intercede for you, and we will all be together again. Myself? How could anything her baby boy does anger his mother? You can hurt me, but you cannot make me love you the less. Wherever you are, whatever you choose to do, you are always my little boy who bangs his knee and comes running to my lap for comfort. My lap has shrunk, or perhaps you have grown, though I have never believed it, but none the less it will always be waiting when you need it. Little boys never get over needing their mother's laps. Do they, darling? I hope not. I hope that you will write and tell me so. But I must add that, in view of the terribly long time that you have not written, it is probably best, until I let you know otherwise, for you to write to me care of your Aunt Eleonora. She will pass it on to me at once, and without causing any more upset. You understand? 1,000 kisses to my baby. Your mother. I understood, all right, and if father could not cry, I could. I did. And at last I got to sleep, and was awakened at once by an alert. We bounced out to the bombing range, the whole regiment, and ran through a simulated exercise, without ammo. We were wearing full unarmored kit otherwise, including earplug receivers, and we had no more than extended when the word came to freeze. We held that freeze for at least an hour. And I mean we held it, barely breathing. A mouse tiptoeing past would have sounded noisy. Something did go past and ran right over me. A coyote, I think. I never twitched. We got awfully cold holding that freeze, but I didn't care. I knew it was my last. I didn't hear reveille the next morning. For the first time in weeks, I had to be whacked out of my sack and barely made formation for morning jerks. There was no point in trying to resign before breakfast, anyhow, since I had to see Zim as the first step. But he wasn't at breakfast. I did ask Bronsky's permission to see the CC, and he said, "Sure, help yourself," and didn't ask me why. But you can't see a man who isn't there. We started a route march after breakfast, and I still hadn't laid eyes on him. It was an out and back, with lunch fetched out to us by copter, an unexpected luxury, since failure to issue field rations before marching usually meant practice starvation except for whatever you had cached. And I hadn't. Too much on my mind. Sergeant Zim came out with the rations, and he held mail call in the field, which was not an unexpected luxury. I'll say this for the MI: they might chop off your food, water, sleep, or anything else, without warning, but they never held up a person's mail a minute longer than circumstances required. That was yours, and they got it to you by the first transportation available, and you could read it at your earliest break, even on maneuvers. This hadn't been too important for me, as, aside from a couple of letters from Carl, I hadn't had anything but junk mail until Mother wrote to me. I didn't even gather around when Zim handed it out. I figured now on not speaking to him until he got in. No point in giving him reason to notice me until we were actually in reach of headquarters. So I was surprised when he called my name and held up a letter. I bounced over and took it, and was surprised again. It was from Mr. Dubois, my high school instructor in history and moral philosophy. I would sooner have expected a letter from Santa Claus. Then, when I read it, it still seemed like a mistake. I had to check the address and the return address. I had to check the address and the return address to convince myself that he had written it and had meant it for me. My dear boy, I would have written to you much sooner to express my delight and my pride in learning that you had not only volunteered to serve, but also had chosen my own service. But not to express surprise, it is what I expected of you, except, possibly, the additional and very personal bonus that you chose the MI. This is the sort of consummation, which does not happen too often, that nevertheless makes all of a teacher's efforts worthwhile. We necessarily sift a great many pebbles, much sand, for each nugget, but the nuggets are the reward. By now the reason I did not write at once is obvious to you. Many young men, not necessarily through any reprehensible fault, are dropped during recruit training. I have waited, I have kept in touch through my own connections, until you had sweated it out, passed the hump, how well we all know that hump, and were certain, barring accidents or illness, of completing your training and your term. You are now going through the hardest part of your service. Not the hardest physically, though physical hardship will never trouble you again. You now have its measure. But the hardest spiritually, the deep, soul-turning readjustments and reevaluations necessary to metamorphise a potential citizen into one in being. Or, rather, I should say, you have already gone through the hardest part, despite all the tribulations you still have ahead of you, and all the hurdles, each higher than the last, which you still must clear. But it is that hump which counts. And, knowing you, lad, I know that I have waited long enough to be sure that you are past your hump, or you would be home by now. When you reached that spiritual mountaintop, you felt something, a new something. Perhaps you haven't words for it. I know I didn't when I was a boot. So perhaps you will permit an older comrade to lend you the words, since it often helps to have discreet words. Simply this: the noblest fate that a man can endure is to place his own mortal body between his loved home and the war's desolation. His loved home and the war's desolation. The words are not mine, of course, as you will recognize. Basic truths cannot change, and once a man of insight expresses one of them, it is never necessary, no matter how much the world changes, to reformulate them. This is an immutable, true everywhere, throughout all time, for all men and all nations. Let me hear from you, please, if you can spare an old man some of your precious sack time to write an occasional letter. And if you should happen to run across any of my former mates, give them my warmest greetings. Good luck, trooper. You've made me proud. Jean V. Dubois, Lieutenant Colonel, Mobile Infantry, retired. The signature was as amazing as the letter itself. Old Sourmouth was a short cor- was a sh- Old Sourmouth was a short colonel? Why, our regional commander was only a major. Mr. Dubois had never used any sort of rank around school. We had supposed, if we thought about it at all, that he must have been a corporal or some such, who had been let out when he lost his hand, and had been fixed up with a soft job teaching a course that didn't have to be passed, or even taught, just audited. Of course we had known that he was a veteran, since history and moral philosophy must be taught by a citizen. But an M.I.? He didn't look it. Prissy, faintly scornful, a dancing master type, not one of us apes. But that was the way he had signed himself. I spent the whole long hike back to camp thinking about that amazing letter. It didn't sound in the least like anything he had ever said in class. Oh, I don't mean that it contradicted anything he had told us in class. It was just entirely different in tone. Since when does a short colonel call a recruit private comrade? When he was plain Mr. Dubois, and I was one of the kids who had to take his course, he hardly seemed to see me. Except once when he got me sore by implying that I had too much money and not enough sense. So my old man could have bought the school and given it to me for Christmas. Is that a crime? It was none of his business. He had been droning along about value, comparing the Marxist theory with the orthodox use theory. Use theory? Mr. Dubois had said, "Of course, the Marxian the Marxian definition of value is ridiculous. All the work all the work one cares to add will not turn a mud pie into an apple tart. It remains a mud pie, value zero. By corollary, unskillful work can easily subtract value. An untalented cook can turn wholesome dough and fresh green apples, valuable already, into an inedible mess, value zero. Conversely, a great chef can fashion those same materials a confection of greater value than a commonplace apple tart, with no more effort than an ordinary cook uses to prepare an ordinary tart. An ordinary sweet. Sorry. These kitchen illustrations demolish the Marxian theory of value, the fallacy from which the entire magnificent fraud of communism derives, and to illustrate the truth of the common sense definition as measured in terms of use. Dubois had waved his stump at us. Nevertheless, wake up back there! Nevertheless, the disheveled old mystic of Das Kapital, turgid, tortured, confused, and neurotic, unscientific, illogical, this pompous fraud Karl Marx, nevertheless, had a glimmering of a very important truth. If he had possessed an analytical mind, he might have formulated the first adequate definition of value, and this planet might have been saved endless grief. Or might not, he added. You! I had sat up with a jerk. If you can't listen, perhaps you can tell the class whether value is a relative or an absolute. I had been listening. I just didn't see any reason not to listen with eyes closed and spine relaxed. But his question caught me out. I hadn't read that day's assignment. An absolute, I answered, guessing. Wrong, he said coldly. Value has no meaning other than in relation to living beings. The value of a thing is always relative to a particular person, is completely personal, and different in quantity for each living human. Market value is a fiction, merely a rough guess at the average of personal values, all of which must be quantitatively different or trade would be impossible. I had wondered, whoops, don't lose the page, please. Thank you. I had wondered what father would have said if he had heard market value called a fiction. Snort in disgust, probably. This very personal relationship, value, has two factors for a human being. First, what he can do with a thing, its use to him, and second, what he must do to get it, its cost to him. There is an old song which asserts the best things in life are free. Not true. Utterly false. This was the tragic fallacy which brought on the decadence and collapse of the democracies of the 20th century. Those noble experiments failed because the people had been led to believe that they could simply vote for whatever they wanted, and get it without toil, without sweat, without tears. Nothing of value is free. Even the breath of life is purchased at birth only through gasping effort and pain. He had been still looking at me, and added, "If you boys and girls had to sweat for your toys, the way a newly born baby has to struggle to live, you would be happier, and much richer. As it is, with some of you, I pity the poverty of your wealth. You, I've just awarded you the prize for the 100-meter dash. Does it make you happy?" I suppose it would. No dodging, please. You have the prize. Here, I'll write it out. Grand prize for the championship. 100-meter sprint. He had actually come back to my seat and pinned it on my chest. There! Are you happy? You value it? Or don't you? I was sore. First that dirty crack about rich kids, a typical sneer of those who haven't got it, and now this farce. I ripped it off and chucked it at him. Mr. Dubois had looked surprised. "It doesn't make you happy? You know darn well I placed fourth." "Exactly. The prize for first place is worthless to you, because you haven't earned it. But you enjoy a modest satisfaction in placing fourth. You earned it. I trust that some of the somnambulists here understood this little morality play. I fancy that the poet who wrote that song meant to imply that the best things in life must be purchased other than with money, which is true, just as the literal meaning of his words is false. The best things in life are beyond money. Their price is agony and sweat and devotion. And the price demanded for the most precious of all things in life is life itself, ultimate cost for perfect value." I'd like to point out once again that I don't understand why every adaptation of Starship Troopers has failed to recognize that our boy Johnny is he did track. He did track and field, not football. Casual reminder, he did not do American football. Hand egg, whatever we're calling it nowadays. He didn't do that. Sorry for Hoven. Sorry, I forget who directed the anime OVA adaptation back in the 80s. I can't remember who directed that. Anyway, he did track and field. Just putting it out there. I mulled over things as I had heard Mr. Dubois, Colonel Dubois, say, as well as his extraordinary letter, while we went swinging back toward camp. Then I stopped thinking because the band dropped back near our position in column and we sang for a while. A French group. Marseillaise, and of course the Madelon, and Sons of Toil and Danger, and Légion Étrangère, and Mademoiselle from Armentières. Armentières. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Armentie accent aigu? I can't keep those straight. RES. Anyway, it's nice to have the band play. It picks you right up when your tail is dragging the prairie. We hadn't had anything but canned music at first, and that only for parade and calls. But the powers that be had found out early who could play and who couldn't. Instruments were provided, and a regimental band was organized, all our own. Even the director and the drum major were boots. Oh, it didn't it didn't mean they got out of anything. Oh, no. It just meant that they were allowed and encouraged to do it on their own time, practicing evenings and Sundays and such, and that they got to strut and countermarch and show off at parade instead of being in ranks with their platoons. A lot of things that we did were run that way. Our chaplain, for example, was a boot. He was older than most of us and had been ordained in some obscure little sect I had never heard of, but he put a lot of passion into his preaching, whether his theology was orthodox or not. Don't ask me. And he was certainly in a position to understand the problems of a recruit. And the singing was fun. Besides, there was nowhere else to go on Sunday morning between morning police and lunch. The band suffered a lot of attrition, but somehow they always kept it going. The camp owned 4 sets of pipes and some Scottish uniforms, donated by Lochiel of Cameron, whose son had been killed there in training, and one of us boots turned out to be a piper. He had learned it in the Scottish Boy Scouts. Pretty soon we had 4 pipers, maybe not good, but loud. Pipes seem very odd when you first hear them, and a tyro practicing can set your teeth on edge. It sounds and looks as if he had a cat under his arm, its tail in his mouth, and biting it. Agreed. But they grow on you. Not agreed. I'm sorry, I could go on a long diatribe about how little I like the bagpipe, but I won't do it today. I'm sorry to the bagpipe lovers out there. I think they serve an admirable purpose in their intended context, which is a bunch of Highlanders hiding in the trees, and then suddenly you hear this horrible wailing noise as a bunch of crazy dudes in skirts come running at you, screaming at the top of their lungs, blaring this thing, about to hack you apart. I think in that context, they're brilliant. They're a psychological weapon. I think as an instrument meant to be enjoyed aesthetically, they're somewhat lacking. But maybe I'm just uncultured. Sorry. Where were we? I have to be careful. I can't go on these bagpipe diatribes. But they grow on you. The first time our pipers kicked their heels out in front of the band, skirling away at Alamein Dead, my hair stood up so straight it lifted my cap. It gets you. Makes tears. He doesn't say why. We couldn't take a parade band out on route march, of course, because no special allowances were made for the band. Tubas and bass drums had to stay behind because a boy in the band had to carry a full kit, same as everybody, and could only manage an instrument small enough to add to his load. But the MI has band instruments which I don't believe anybody else has, such as a little box hardly larger than a harmonica, an electric gadget which does an amazing job of faking a big horn and is played the same way. Comes band call when you're headed for the horizon, each bandsman sheds his kit without stopping, his squad mates split it up, and he trots to the column position of the color company and starts blasting. It helps. The band drifted aft, almost out of earshot, and we stopped singing because your own singing drowns out the beat when it's too far away. I suddenly realized I felt good. I tried to think why I did. Because we would be in after a couple of hours and I could resign? No. When I had decided to resign, it had indeed given me a measure of peace, quieted down my awful jitters, and let me go to sleep. But this was something else, and no reason for it that I could see. Then I knew. I had passed my hump. I was over the hump that Colonel Dubois had written about. I actually walked over it and started down, swinging easily. The prairie through there was flat as a griddle cake, but just the same I had been plodding wearily uphill all the way out and about halfway back. Then, at some point, I think it was while we were singing, I had passed the hump, and it was all downhill. My kit felt lighter, and I was no longer worried. When we got in, I didn't speak to Sergeant Zim. I no longer needed to. Instead, he spoke to me, motioned me to him as we fell out. Yes, sir? This is a personal question, so don't answer it unless you feel like it. He stopped, and I wondered if he suspected that I had overheard his chewing out, and shivered. At mail call today, he said, you got a letter. I noticed, purely by accident, none of my business, the name on the return address. It's a fairly common name, some places, but this is the personal question you need not answer. By any chance, does the person who wrote that letter have his left hand off at the wrist? I guess my chin dropped. How did you know, sir? I was nearby when it happened. It is Colonel Dubois, right? Yes, sir. I added. He was my high school instructor in history and moral philosophy. I think that was the only time I ever impressed Sergeant Zim, even faintly. His eyebrows went up an eighth of an inch, and his eyes widened slightly. So, you're extraordinarily fortunate. He added, when you answer his letter, if you don't mind, you might say that Ship Sergeant Zim sends his respects. Yes, sir. Oh, I think maybe he sent you a message, sir. What? Uh, I'm not certain. I took out the letter, just, if you should happen to run across any of my former mates, give them my warmest greetings. Is that for you, sir? Zim pondered it, his eyes looking through me somewhere else. Ah, yes, it is. For me, among others. Thanks very much. Then suddenly it was over, and he said briskly, 9 minutes to parade, and you still have to shower and change. On the bounce, soldier! Before anyone asks, yes, it had occurred to me to read Zim as, what's his name? Oh, God. R. Lee Ermey. I think I'm mangling his name. Ermey, last name. He was, let's see, he was in Full Metal Jacket. He's been in a bunch of other stuff. He was on the History Channel for a while for reasons. I think he's passed away now, sadly. Um, that stereotypical drill sergeant, but I decided to go with something a little easier to do and make coherent. There are rationales why I pick certain voices. Sometimes they're not good ones. Sometimes they're miscalculations. Other times they just work out. Chapter 7. The young recruit is silly. He thinks o' suicide. He's lost his gutter devil. He ain't got his pride. He asn't got his pride. But day by day they kicks him, which helps him on a bit, till he finds hisself one mornin' with a full and proper kit. Gettin' clear o' dirtiness, gettin' done with mess, gettin' shut o' doin' things, rather more or less. Rudyard Kipling. I'm not going to talk much more about my boot training. Mostly it was simply work, but I was squared away. Enough said. But I do want to mention a little about powered suits, partly because I was fascinated by them, and partly oh, sorry. But I do want to mention a little about powered suits, partly because I was fascinated by them, and also because that was what led me into trouble. No complaints. I rated what I got. An MI lives by his suit the way a K9 man lives by, and with, and on his doggy partner. Powered armor is one half of the reason we call ourselves mobile infantry instead of just infantry. The other half are the spaceships that drop us and the capsules we drop in. Our suits give us better eyes, better ears, stronger backs, to carry heavier weapons and more ammo, better legs, more intelligence. Intelligence in the military meaning. A man in a suit can be just as stupid as anybody else, only he had better not be. More firepower, greater endurance, less vulnerability. A suit isn't a spacesuit, though it can serve as one. It is not primarily armor, although the Knights of the Round Table were not armored as well as we are. It isn't a tank, but a single MI private could take on a squadron of those things and knock them off unassisted if anybody was silly enough to put tanks against MI. A suit is not a ship, but it can fly, a little. On the other hand, neither spaceships nor atmosphere craft can fight against a man in a suit except by saturation bombing of the area he is in, like burning down a house to get one flea. Contrariwise, we can do many things that no ship, air, submersible, or space, can do. There are a dozen different ways of delivering destruction in impersonal wholesale, via ships and missiles of one sort or another, catastrophes so widespread, so unselective, that the war is over because that nation or planet has ceased to exist. What we do is entirely different. We make war as personal as a punch in the nose. We can be selective, applying precisely the required amount of pressure at the specified point at a designated time. We've never been told to go down and kill or capture all left-handed redheads in a particular area, but if they tell us to, we can. We will. I don't know what the beef with redheads there is, but okay. We are the boys who go to a particular place at H hour, occupy a designated terrain, stand on it, dig the enemy out of their holes, force them then and there to surrender or die. We're the bloody infantry, the doughboy, the duckfoot, the foot soldier who goes where the enemy is and takes him on in person. We've been doing it, with changes in weapons, but very little change in our trade, at least since the time 5,000 years ago when the foot sloggers of Sargon the Great forced the Sumerians to cry uncle. Maybe they'll be able to do without us someday. Maybe some mad genius with myopia, a bulging forehead, and a cybernetic mind will devise a weapon that can go down a hole, pick out the opposition, and force it to surrender or die, without killing that gang of your own people they've got imprisoned down there. I wouldn't know. I'm not a genius, I'm an MI. In the meantime, until they build a machine to replace us, my mates can handle that job, and I might be some help on it too. Maybe someday they'll get everything nice and tidy and we'll have that thing we sing about when we ain't a-gonna study war no more. Maybe. Maybe the same day the leopard will take off his spots and get a job as a Jersey cow, too. But again, I wouldn't know. I'm not a professor of cosmopolitics. I'm an MI. When the government sends me, I go. In between, I catch a lot of sack time. But while they have not yet built a machine to replace us, they've surely thought up some honeys to help us. The suit, in particular. No need to describe what it looks like, since it has been pictured so often. Suited up, you look like a big steel gorilla, armed with gorilla-sized weapons. This may be why a sergeant generally opens his remarks with, "You apes." However, it seems more likely that Caesar's sergeants used the same honorific. But the suits are considerably stronger than a gorilla. If an MI in a suit swapped hugs with a gorilla, the gorilla would be dead, crushed. The MI in the suit wouldn't be mussed. Oh, that reminds me. Where are you? Is that it? Yes, but also no. No, the other one's a bit better. Okay. This is the design from the anime OVA. I can't find. There's an art book for this, and I can't seem to find. I know I had it somewhere, or at least some selections from it, and I can't find where I put them. I'll try and find them over the course of the next week. It doesn't really get across how bulky how top-heavy their arms are, though. Unfortunately, maybe the other one did, because that had like 4 dudes in it. Yeah, there we go. Big burly arms. The muscles, the pseudo-musculature, gets all the publicity, but it's the control of all that power which merits it. The real genius in the design is that you don't have to control the suit. You just wear it like your clothes, like skin. Any sort of ship you have to learn to pilot. It takes a long time, a new full set of reflexes, a different and artificial way of thinking. Even riding a bicycle demands an acquired skill, very different from walking, whereas a spaceship, oh brother, I won't live that long. Spaceships are for acrobats who are also mathematicians. But a suit? You just wear. 2,000 pounds of it, maybe, in full kit. Yet the very first time you are fitted into one, you can immediately walk, run, jump, lie down, pick up an egg without breaking it. That takes a trifle of practice, but anything improves with practice. Dance a jig, if you can dance a jig, that is, without a suit, and jump right over the house next door and come down to a feather landing. The secret lies in negative feedback and amplification. Don't ask me to sketch the circuitry of a suit. I can't. But I understand that some very good concert violinists can't build a violin either. I can do field maintenance and field repairs and check off the 347 items from cold to ready to wear, and that's all a dumb MI is expected to do. But if my suit gets really sick, I call the doctor, a doctor of science, electromechanical engineering, who is a staff naval officer, usually a lieutenant, read captain for our ranks, and is part of the ship's company on the troop transport. Or who is reluctantly assigned to a regimental headquarters at Camp Curry, a fate worse than death to a Navy man. But if you really are interested in the prints and stereos and schematics of a suit's physiology, you can find most of it, the unclassified part, in any fairly large public library. For the small amount that is classified, you must look up a reliable enemy agent. Reliable, I say, because spies are a tricky lot. He's likely to sell you the parts you could get free from the public library. But here is how it works, minus the diagrams. The inside of the suit is a mass of pressure receptors, hundreds of them. You push with the heel of your hand. The suit feels it, amplifies it, pushes with you to take the pressure off the receptors that gave the order to push. That's confusing, but negative feedback is always a confusing idea the first time, even though your body has been doing it ever since you quit kicking helplessly as a baby. Young children are still learning it. That's why they are called clumsy. Adolescents and adults do it without knowing they ever learned it, and a man with Parkinson's disease has damaged his circuits for it. The suit has feedback which causes it to match any motion you make, exactly, but with great force. Controlled force. Force controlled without your having to think about it. You jump, that heavy suit jumps, but higher than you can jump in your skin. Jump really hard and the suit's jets cut in, amplifying what the suit's leg muscles did, giving you a 3-jet shove, the axis of pressure of which passes through your center of mass. So you jump over that house next door, which makes you come down as fast as you went up, which the suit notes through your proximity and closing gear, a sort of simple-minded radar resembling a proximity fuse, and therefore cuts in the jets again just the right amount to cushion your landing without your having to think about it. And that is the beauty of a powered suit. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to drive it, fly it, con it, operate it. You just wear it and it takes orders directly from your muscles and does for you what your muscles are trying to do. This leaves you with your whole mind free to handle your weapons and notice what is going on around you, which is supremely important to an infantryman who wants to die in bed. If you load a Mudfoot down with a lot of gadgets that he has to watch, somebody a lot more simply equipped, say with a stone axe, will sneak up and bash his head in while he's trying to read a vernier. Your eyes and your ears are rigged to help you without cluttering up your attention, too. Say you have 3 audio circuits, common in a Marauder suit. The frequency control to maintain tactical security is very complex. At least 2 frequencies for each circuit, both of which are necessary for any signal at all, and each of which wobbles under the control of a cesium clock timed to a microsecond with the other end. But all this is no problem of yours. You want Circuit A to your squad leader, you bite down once. For Circuit B, bite down twice, and so on. The mic is taped to your throat, the plugs are in your ears and can't be jarred out. Just talk. Besides that, outside mics on each side of your helmet give you binaural hearing for your immediate surroundings, just as if your head were bare. Or you can suppress any noisy neighbors and not miss what your platoon leader is saying simply by turning your head. Since your head is the one part of your body not involved in the pressure receptors controlling the suit's muscles, you use your head, your jaw muscles, your chin, your neck, to fight. Oh, to switch things, I skipped a line. You use your head, your jaw muscles, your chin, your neck, to switch things for you and thereby leave your hands free to fight. A chin plate handles all visual displays the way the jaw switch handles the audios. All displays are thrown on a mirror in front of your forehead from where the work is actually going on above and back of your head. All this helmet gear makes you look like a hydrocephalic gorilla, but with luck, the enemy won't live long enough to be offended by your appearance, and it is a very convenient arrangement. You can flip through your several types of radar displays quicker than you can change channels to avoid a commercial. Catch a range and bearing, locate your boss, check your flank men, whatever. If you toss your head like a horse bothered by a fly, your infrared snoopers go up on your forehead. Toss it again, they come down. If you let go of your rocket launcher, the suit snaps it back until you need it again. No point in discussing water nipples, air supply, gyros, etc. The point to all the arrangements is the same, to leave you free to follow your trade. Slaughter. Of course, these things do require practice, and you do practice until picking the right circuit is as automatic as brushing your teeth, and so on. But simply wearing the suit, moving in it, requires almost no practice. You practice jumping because, while you do it with a completely natural motion, you jump higher, faster, farther, and stay up longer. The last alone calls for a new orientation. Those seconds in the air can be used. Seconds are jewels beyond price in combat. While off the ground in a jump, you can get a range and bearing, pick a target, talk and receive, fire a weapon, reload, decide to jump again without landing, and override your automatics to cut the jets in again. You can do all of these things in one bounce with practice. But in general, powered armor doesn't require practice. It simply does it for you, just the way you were doing it, only better. All but one thing. You can't scratch where it itches. If I ever find a suit that will let me scratch between my shoulder blades, I will marry it. There are three main types of MI armor: Marauder, Command, and Scout. Scout suits are very fast and very long range, but lightly armed. Command suits are heavy. Command suits are heavy and are what? Oh. Command suits are heavy on go juice and jump juice, are fast and can jump high. They have 3 times as much comm and radar gear as other suits, and a dead reckoning tracker, inertial. Marauders are for those guys in ranks with the sleepy look, the executioners. Sorry about that, lost a page. Also having to handle this thing like it's like walking on eggshells because it's a moderately old edition and it's showing its age. An edition from '61. It's not a first ed. I don't I like my books. I don't collect books per se, so I don't really have many first editions. As I may have said, I fell in love with powered armor, even though my first crack at it gave me a strained shoulder. Any day thereafter that my section was allowed to practice in suits was a big day for me. The day I goofed, I had simulated sergeant's chevrons and a simulated section leader, and was armed with simulated A-bomb rockets to use in simulated darkness against a simulated enemy. That was the trouble. Everything was simulated, but you are required to behave as if it is all real. We were retreating, advancing toward the rear, I mean, and one of the instructors cut the power on one of my men, by radio control, making him a helpless casualty. Per MI doctrine, I ordered the pickup, felt rather cocky that I had managed to get the order out before my number 2 had cut out to do it anyhow, turned to do the next thing I had to do, which was to lay down a simulated atomic ruckus to discourage the simulated enemy overtaking us. Our flank was swinging. I was supposed to fire it sort of diagonally, but with the required spacing to protect my own men from the blast while still putting it in close enough to trouble the bandits. On the bounce, of course. The movement over the terrain and the problem itself had been discussed ahead of time. We were still green. The only variations supposed to be left in were casualties. Doctrine required me to locate exactly, by radar beacon, my own men who could be affected by the blast. But this all had to be done fast, and I wasn't too sharp at reading those little radar displays anyhow. I cheated just a touch, flipped my snoopers up and looked, bare eyes in broad daylight. I left plenty of room. Shucks, I could see the only man affected half a mile away, and all I had was just a little bitty HE rocket, intended to make a lot of smoke and not much else. So I picked a spot by eye, took the rocket launcher, and let it fly. Then I bounced away, feeling smug, no seconds lost, and had my power cut in the air. This doesn't hurt you. It's a delayed action, executed by your landing. I grounded, and there I stuck, squatting, held upright by gyros but unable to move. You do not, repeat, not move when surrounded by a ton of metal with your power dead. Instead, I cussed to myself. I hadn't thought that they would make me a casualty when I was supposed to be leading the problem. Shucks and other comments. I should have known that Sergeant Zim would be monitoring the section leader. He bounced over to me, spoke to me privately on the face-to-face. He suggested that I might be able to get a job sweeping floors since I was too stupid, clumsy, and careless to handle dirty dishes. He discussed my past and probable future, and several other things that I did not want to hear about. He ended by saying tonelessly, "How would you like to have Colonel Dubois see what you've done?" Then he left me. I waited there, crouched over, for 2 hours until the drill was over. The suit, which had been feather light, real 7-league boots, felt like an iron maiden. At last he returned for me, restored power, and we bounded together at top speed to BHQ. Captain Frankel said less, but it cut more. Then he paused and added in that flat voice officers use when quoting regulations. "You may demand trial by court-martial if such be your choice. How say you? How say you?" I gulped and said, "No, sir." Until that moment, I hadn't fully realized just how much trouble I was in. Captain Frankel seemed to relax slightly. "Then we'll see what the regimental commander has to say. Sergeant, escort the prisoner." We walked rapidly over to RHQ, and for the first time I met the regimental commander face to face. And by then I was sure that I was going to catch a court no matter what. But I remembered sharply how Ted Hendrick had talked himself into one. I said nothing. Major Malloy said a total of 5 words to me. After hearing Sergeant Zim, he said 3 of them. "Is that correct?" I said, "Yes, sir," which ended my part of it. Major Malloy said to Captain Frankel, "Is there any possibility of salvaging this man?" Captain Frankel answered, "I believe so, sir." Major Malloy said, "Then we'll try administrative punishment," turned to me, and said, "5 lashes." Well, they certainly didn't keep me dangling. 15 minutes later, and the doctor had completed checking my heart, and the sergeant of the guard was outfitting me with that special shirt which comes off without having to be pulled over the hands, zippered from the neck down to the arms. Assembly for parade had just sounded. I was feeling detached, unreal, which I have learned is one way of being scared right out of your senses. The nightmare hallucination. Zim came into the guard tent just as the call ended. He glanced at the sergeant of the guard, Corporal Jones, and Jones went out. Zim stepped up to me, slipped something into my hand. "Bite on that," he said quietly. "It helps. I know." It was a rubber mouthpiece, such as we use to avoid broken teeth in hand-to-hand combat drill. Zim left. I put it in my mouth. Then they handcuffed me and marched me out. The order read, "In simulated combat, gross negligence which would in action have caused the death of a teammate." Then they peeled off my shirt and strung me up. Now, here is a very odd thing. A flogging isn't as hard to take as it is to watch. I don't mean it's a picnic. It hurts worse than anything else I have ever had happen to me, and the waits between strokes are worse than the strokes themselves. But the mouthpiece did help, and the only yelp I let out never got past it. Here's the second odd thing. Nobody even mentioned it to me, not even the other boots. So far as I could see, Zim and the instructors treated me exactly the same afterwards as they had before. From the instant the doctor painted the marks and told me to go back to duty, it was all done with, completely. I even managed to eat a little at dinner that night and pretend to take part in the jawing at the table. Another thing about administrative punishment. There is no permanent black mark. Those records are destroyed at the end of boot training and you start clean. The only record is one where it counts most. You don't forget it. Chapter 8. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old he will not depart from it. Proverbs 22:6. There were other floggings, but darn few. Hendrik was the only man in our regiment to be flogged by sentence of court-martial. The others were administrative punishment, like mine, and for lashes it was necessary to go all the way up to the regimental commander, which a subordinate commander finds distasteful, to put it faintly. Even then, Major Malloy was much more likely to kick the man out, undesirable discharge, than to have the whipping post erected. In a way, an administrative flogging is the mildest sort of Sorry, one sec. Sorry about that. Not a phone call I was expecting, but an important one nonetheless. I will call them back when I'm done. Even then, Major Malloy was much more likely to kick the man out, undesirable discharge, than to have the whipping post erected. In a way, an administrative flogging is the mildest sort of a compliment. It means that your superiors think that there is a faint possibility that you just might have the character eventually to make a soldier and a citizen, unlikely as it seems at the moment. I was the only one to get the maximum administrative punishment. None of the others got more than 3 lashes. Nobody else came as close as I did to putting on civilian clothes, but still squeaked by. This is a social distinction of sorts. I don't recommend it. But we had another case, much worse than mine or Ted Hendricks. A really sick-making one. Once they erected gallows. Now, look, get this straight. This case didn't really have anything to do with the Army. The crime didn't take place at Camp Curry, and the placement officer who accepted this boy for MI should turn in his suit. He deserted only 2 days after we arrived at Curry. Ridiculous, of course, but nothing about the case made sense. Why didn't he resign? Desertion, naturally, is one of the 31 crash landings, but the Army doesn't invoke the death penalty for it unless there are some special circumstances, such as in the face of the enemy, or something else that turns it from a highly informal way of resigning into something that can't be ignored. The Army makes no effort to find deserters and bring them back. This makes the hardest kind of sense. We're all volunteers. We're MI because we want to be. We're proud to be MI, and the MI is proud of us. If a man doesn't feel that way about it, from his calloused feet to his hairy ears, I don't want him on my flank when the trouble starts. If I buy a piece of it, I want men around me who will pick me up because they're MI, and I'm MI, and my skin means as much to them as their own. I don't want any ersatz soldiers dragging their tails and ducking out when the party gets rough. It's a whole lot safer to have a blank file on your flank than to have an alleged soldier who is nursing the conscript syndrome. So if they run, let 'em run. It's a waste of time and money to fetch 'em back. Of course, most of them do come back, though it may take them years. In which case, the Army tiredly lets them have their 50 lashes instead of hanging them, and turns them loose. I suppose it must wear on a man's nerves to be a fugitive when everybody else is either a citizen or a legal resident, even when the police aren't trying to find him. The wicked flee when no man pursueth. The temptation to turn yourself in, take your lumps, and breathe easily again must get to be overpowering. But this boy didn't turn himself in. He was gone 4 months, and I doubt if his own company remembered him, since he had been with them only a couple of days. He was probably just a name without a face, the Dillinger NL, who had to be reported day after day as absent without leave on the morning muster. Then he killed a baby girl. He was tried and convicted by a local tribunal, but identity checks showed that he was an undischarged soldier. The department had to be notified, and our commanding general at once intervened. He was returned to us, since military law and jurisdiction take precedence over civil code. Why did the general bother? Why didn't he let the local sheriff do the job? In order to teach us a lesson? Not at all. I'm quite sure that our general did not think that any of his boys needed to be nauseated in order to not kill any baby girls. By now, I believe that he would have spared us the sight, had it been possible. We did learn a lesson, though nobody mentioned it at the time, and it is one that takes a long time to sink in until it becomes second nature. The MI take care of their own, no matter what. Dillinger belonged to us. He was still on our rolls. Even though we didn't want him, even though we should never have had him, even though we would have been happy to disclaim him, he was a member of our regiment. We couldn't brush him off and let a sheriff 1,000 miles away handle it. If it has to be done, a man, a real man, shoots his own dog himself. He doesn't hire a proxy who may bungle it. The regimental record said that Dillinger was ours, so taking care of him was our duty. That evening we marched to the parade grounds at slow march, 60 beats to the minute. Hard to keep step when you're used to 140, while the band played Dirge for the Unmourned. Then Dillinger was marched out, dressed in MI full dress, just as we were, and the band played Danny Deever, while they stripped off every trace of insignia, even buttons and cap, leaving him in a maroon and light blue suit that was no longer a uniform. The drums held a sustained roll, and it was all over. We passed in review and on home at a fast trot. I don't think anybody fainted, and I don't think anybody quite got sick, even though most of us didn't eat much dinner that night, and I've never heard the mess tent so quiet. But, grisly as it was the first time I had seen death, first time for most of us. It was not the shock that Ted Hendricks' flogging was. I mean, you couldn't put yourself in Dillinger's place. You didn't have any feeling of, it could have been me. Not counting the technical matter of desertion, Dillinger had committed at least 4 capital crimes. If his victim had lived, he still would have danced Danny Deever for any one of the other 3. Kidnapping, demand of ransom, criminal neglect, etc. I had no sympathy for him, and still haven't. That old saw about to understand is to forgive all is a lot of tripe. Some things, the more you understand, the more you loathe them. My sympathy is reserved for Barbara Ann Enthwaite, whom I had never seen, and for her parents, who would never again see their little girl. As the band put away their instruments that night, we started 30 days of mourning for Barbara and of disgrace for us, with our colors draped in black. No music at parade, no singing on route march. Only once did I hear anybody complain, and another boot promptly asked him how he would like to see a full set of lumps. How he would like a full set of lumps. Certainly it hadn't been our fault, but our business was to guard little girls, not kill them. Our regiment had been dishonored. We had to clean it. We were disgraced, and we felt disgraced. That night I tried to figure out how such things could be kept from happening. Of course, they hardly ever do nowadays, but even once is way too many. I never did reach an answer that satisfied me. This Dillinger, he never looked like anybody else, and his behavior and record couldn't have been too odd, or he would never have reached Camp Curry in the first place. Oh, sorry. This Dillinger, he looked like anybody else, and his behavior and record couldn't have been too odd, or he never would have reached Camp Curry in the first place. I suppose he was one of those pathological personalities you read about. No way to spot them. Well, if there was no way to keep it from happening once, there was only one sure way to keep it from happening twice, which we had used. If Dillinger had understood what he was doing, which seemed incredible, then he got what was coming to him, except that it seemed a shame that he hadn't suffered as much as had little Barbara Ann. He practically hadn't suffered at all. But suppose, as seemed more likely, that he was so crazy that he had never been aware that he was doing anything wrong. What then? Well, we shoot mad dogs, don't we? Yes, but being crazy that way is a sickness. I couldn't see but two possibilities. Either he couldn't be made well, in which case he was better dead for his own sake and for the safety of others, or he could be treated and made sane. In which case, it seemed to me, if he ever became sane enough for civilized society, and thought over what he had done while he was sick, what could be left for him but suicide? How could he live with himself? And suppose he escaped before he was cured, and did the same thing again, and maybe again? How do you explain that? How do you explain that to bereaved parents, in view of his record? I couldn't see but one answer. I found myself mulling over a discussion in our class in history and moral philosophy. Mr. Dubois was talking about the disorders that preceded the breakup of the North American Republic back in the 20th century. According to him, there was a time just before they went down the drain when such crimes as Dillinger's were as common as dog fights. The terror had not been just in North America. Russia and the British Isles had it too, as well as other places. But it reached its peak in North America shortly before things went to pieces. Law-abiding people, Dubois had told us, hardly dared go into a public park at night. To do so was to risk attack by wolf packs of children, armed with chains, knives, homemade guns, bludgeons. To be hurt, at least, robbed most certainly, injured for life probably, or even killed. This went on for years, right up to the war between the Russo-Anglo-American alliance and the Chinese hegemony. Murder, drug addiction, larceny, assault, and vandalism were commonplace. Nor were parks the only places. These things happened also on the streets in daylight, on school grounds, even inside school buildings. But parks were so notoriously unsafe that honest people stayed clear of them after dark. Reminds me of New York in the 70s and 80s. Maybe he had a point? Well, a point's being made. Oh boy. Things are definitely better now, I should think. But parks were so notoriously unsafe that honest people stayed clear of them after dark. I had tried to imagine such things happening in our schools. I simply couldn't. Nor in our parks. A park was a place for fun, not for getting hurt. As for getting killed in one, Mr. Dubois, didn't they have police? Or courts? They had many more police than we have, and more courts. All overworked. I guess I don't get it.
If a boy in our city had done anything half that bad, well, he and his father would have been flogged side by side. But such things just didn't happen. Mr. Dubois then demanded of me, "Define a juvenile delinquent." One of those kids. The ones that used to beat up people." "Wrong." "Huh? But the book said—" "My apologies. Your textbook does so state, but calling a tail a leg does not make the name fit. Juvenile delinquent is a contradiction in terms, one which gives a clue to their problem and their failure to stop it. Have you ever raised a puppy?" "Yes, sir." "Did you housebreak him?" Yes, sir. Eventually. It was my slowness in this that caused my mother to rule that dogs must stay out of the house. "Ah, yes. When your puppy made mistakes, were you angry?" "What? Why, he didn't know any better. He was just a puppy." "What did you do?" "Why, I scolded him and rubbed his nose in it and paddled him." "Surely he could not understand your words?" "No, but he could tell I was sore at him." "But you just said that you were not angry." Mr. Dubois had an infuriating way of getting a person mixed up. "No, but I had to make him think I was. He had to learn, didn't he?" "Conceded. But having made it clear to him that you disapproved, how could you be so cruel as to spank him as well? You said the poor beastie didn't know that he was doing wrong, yet you inflicted pain. Justify yourself, or are you a sadist?" I didn't then know what a sadist was, but I knew pups. "Mr. Dubois, you have to. You scold him so he knows he's in trouble, you rub his nose in it so that he will know what trouble you mean, you paddle him so that he darn well won't do it again, and you have to do it right away. It doesn't do him a bit of good to punish him later. You'll just confuse him. Even so, he won't learn from one lesson, so you watch and catch him again and paddle him still harder. Pretty soon he learns. But it's a waste of breath just to scold him." Then I added, "I guess you've never raised pups." "Many. I'm raising a dachshund now, by your methods. Let's get back to those juvenile criminals. The most vicious averaged somewhat younger than you here in this class, and they often started their lawless careers much younger. Let us never forget that puppy. These children were often caught. Police arrested batches each day. Were they scolded? Yes, often scathingly. Were their noses rubbed in it? Rarely. News organs and officials usually kept their names secret. In many places the law so required for criminals under 18. Were they spanked? Indeed not. Many had never been spanked even as small children. There was a widespread belief that spanking, or any punishment involving pain, did a child permanent psychic damage. I had reflected that my father must never have heard of that theory. "Corporal punishment in schools was forbidden by law," he had gone on. "Flogging was lawful as a sentence of court only in one small province, Delaware, and there only for a few crimes and was rarely invoked. It was regarded as cruel and unusual punishment." Dubois had mused aloud. "I do not understand objections to cruel and unusual punishment. While a judge could be benevolent in purpose, his awards should cause the criminal to suffer, else there is no punishment. And pain is the basic mechanism built into us by millions of years of evolution, which safeguards us by warning when something threatens our survival. Why should society refuse to use such a highly perfected survival mechanism? However, that period was loaded with pre-scientific pseudo-psychological nonsense. As for unusual, punishment must be unusual, or it serves no purpose." He then pointed his stump at another boy. "What would happen if a puppy were spanked every hour?" Probably drive him crazy." "Probably. It certainly will not teach him anything. How long has it been since the principal of this school last had to switch a pupil?" I'm not sure. About 2 years. The kid that swiped—" "Never mind. Long enough. It means that such punishment is so unusual as to be significant, to deter, to instruct. Back to these young criminals. They probably were not spanked as babies. They certainly were not flogged for their crimes. The usual sequence was, for a first offense, a warning, a scolding, often without trial. After several offenses, a sentence of confinement, but with sentence suspended and the youngster placed on probation. A boy might be arrested many times and convicted several times before he was punished, and then it would be merely confinement, with others like him for whom he learned still more criminal habits. If he kept out of major trouble while confined, he could eventually evade most of even that mild punishment, be given probation, paroled in the jargon of the times. This incredible sequence could go on for years, while his crimes increased in frequency and viciousness, with no punishment whatever save rare, dull but comfortable confinements. Then suddenly, usually by law on his 18th birthday, this so-called juvenile delinquent becomes an adult criminal, and sometimes wound up in only weeks or months in a death cell, awaiting execution for murder. You! He had singled me out again. Suppose you merely scolded your puppy, never punished him, let him go on making messes in the house, and occasionally locked him up in an outbuilding, but soon let him back into the house with a warning not to do it again. Then one day you notice that he is now a grown dog and still not housebroken, whereupon you whip out a gun and shoot him dead. Comment, please? Why, that's the craziest way to raise a dog I ever heard of. I agree. Or a child. Whose fault would it be? Uh, why, mine, I guess. I agree, but I'm not guessing.
Mr. Dubois, a girl blurted out, but why? Why didn't they spank little kids when they needed it and use a good dose of the strap on any older ones who deserved it? The sort of lesson they wouldn't forget. I mean, ones who did things really bad. Why not?
I don't know, he had answered grimly, except that the time-tested method of instilling social virtue and respect for law in the minds of the young did not appeal to a pre-scientific pseudo-professional class who called themselves social workers, or sometimes child psychologists. It was too simple for them, apparently, since anybody could do it, using only the patience and firmness needed in training a puppy. I have sometimes wondered if they cherished a vested interest in disorder, but that is unlikely. Adults almost always act from conscious highest motives, no matter what their behavior.
But, good heavens, the girl answered, I didn't like being spanked any more than any kid does, but when I needed it, my mamma delivered. The only time I ever got a switching in school, I got another one when I got home, and that was years and years ago. I don't ever expect to be hauled up in front of a judge and sentenced to a flogging. You behave yourself and such things don't happen. I don't see anything wrong with our system. It's a lot better than not being able to walk outdoors for fear of your life. Why, that's horrible.
I agree. Young lady, the tragic wrongness of what those well-meaning people did, contrasted with what they thought they were doing, goes very deep. They had no scientific theory of morals. They did have a theory of morals, and they tried to live by it. I should not have sneered at their motives. But their theory was wrong. Half of it fuzzy-headed wishful thinking, half of it rationalized charlatanry. The more earnest they were, the farther it led them astray. You see, they assumed that man has a moral instinct.
Sir, but I thought, but he does. I have.
No, my dear, you have a cultivated conscience, a most carefully trained one. Man has no moral instinct. He is not born with moral sense. You were not born with it, I was not, and a puppy has none. We acquire moral sense when we do, through training, experience, and hard sweat of the mind. We acquire moral sense, when we do, through training, experience, and hard sweat of the mind. These unfortunate juvenile criminals were born with none, even as you and I. Even as you and I, and they had no chance to acquire any. Their experiences did not permit it. What is moral sense? It is an elaboration of the instinct to survive. The instinct to survive is human nature itself, and every aspect of our personalities derives from it. Anything that conflicts with the survival instinct acts sooner or later to eliminate the individual, and thereby fails to show up in future generations. The truth is mathematically demonstrable, everywhere verifiable. It is the single eternal imperative controlling everything we do. But the instinct to survive, he had gone on, can be cultivated into motivations more subtle and much more complex than the blind, brute urge of the individual to stay alive. Young lady, what you miscalled your moral instinct was the instilling in you by your elders of the truth that survival can have stronger imperatives than that of your own personal survival. Survival of your family, for example, of your children when you have them, of your nation if you struggle that high up the scale, and so on up. A scientifically verifiable theory of morals must be rooted in the individual's instinct to survive, and nowhere else, and must correctly describe the hierarchy of survival, note the motivations at each level, and resolve all conflicts. We have such a theory now. We can solve any moral problem on any level. Self-interest, love of family, duty to country, responsibility toward the human race. We are even developing an exact ethic for extra-human relations. But all moral problems can be illustrated by one misquotation. Greater love hath no man than a mother cat dying to defend her kittens. Once you understand the problem facing that cat and how she solved it, you will then be ready to examine yourself and learn how high up the moral ladder you are capable of climbing. These juvenile criminals hit a low level. Born with only the instinct for survival, the highest morality they achieved was a shaky loyalty to a peer group, a street gang. But the do-gooders attempted to appeal to their better natures, to reach them, to spark their moral sense. Tosh! They had no better natures. Experience taught them that what they were doing was the way to survive. The puppy never got his spanking. Therefore what he did with pleasure and success must be moral. The basis of all morality is duty, a concept with the same relation to group that self-interest has to individual. Nobody preached duty to these kids in a way that they could understand, that is, with a spanking. But the society they were in told them endlessly about their rights. The results should have been predictable, since a human being has no natural rights of any nature. Mr. Dubois had paused. Somebody took the bait. Sir, how about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? Ah, yes, the unalienable rights. Each year someone quotes that magnificent poetry. Life? What right to life has a man who is drowning in the Pacific? The ocean will not hearken to his cries. What right to life has a man who must die if he is to save his children? If he chooses to save his own life, does he do so as a matter of right? If two men are starving and cannibalism is the only alternative to death, which man's right is unalienable? And is it right? As to liberty, the heroes who signed the great document pledged themselves to buy liberty with their lives. Liberty is never unalienable. It must be redeemed regularly with the blood of patriots, or it always vanishes. Of all the so-called natural human rights that have ever been invented, liberty is least likely to be cheap and is never free of cost. The third right, the pursuit of happiness. It is indeed unalienable, but it is not a right. It is simply a universal condition which tyrants cannot take away, nor patriots restore. Cast me into a dungeon, burn me at a stake, crown me king of kings, I can pursue happiness as long as my brain lives. But neither gods nor saints, wise men nor subtle drugs can ensure that I will catch it. Mr. Dubois then turned to me. I told you that juvenile delinquent is a contradiction in terms. Delinquent means failing in duty. But duty is an adult virtue. Indeed, a juvenile becomes an adult when, and only when, he acquires a knowledge of duty and embraces it as dearer than the self-love he was born with. There never was, there cannot be, a juvenile delinquent. But for every juvenile criminal, there are always one or more adult delinquents, people of mature years who either do not know their duty or who, knowing it, fail. And that was the soft spot which destroyed what was in many ways an admirable culture. The junior hoodlums who roamed their streets were symptoms of a greater sickness. Their citizens, all of them counted as such, glorified their mythology of rights, and lost track of their duties. No nation so constituted can endure. I wondered how Colonel Dubois would have classed Dillinger. Was he a juvenile criminal who merited pity even though you had to get rid of him? Or was he an adult delinquent who deserved nothing but contempt? I didn't know. I would never know. The one thing I was sure of was that he would never again kill any little girls. That suited me. I went to sleep. And that is where I will call it for this week. Next week we will continue with more Starship Troopers. Alrighty. Oh gosh, bunch of comments. Oh golly. I'm sorry. I was lost in the sauce. I wasn't paying attention. Okay. Matt Maria, hi Frag. Thanks for the reading. Catch you on the replay. Sure thing. Thanks for tuning in. Delaware. Yes, apparently Delaware. I didn't know. Maybe it doesn't anymore. I'm not going to look it up at this time. Lucky they have not laid a hand on my son yet. He is only 7. My father and I boxed and wrestled, and he kept a paddle in my closet, and the thought of it being used was enough. Yes. Yeah, pretty much the same for me. It's you learn. There are things you just don't do. Of course, figuring out, and I think that's kind of where there needs to be a bit more nuance than is in Starship Troopers, is figuring out where is the line. I don't necessarily disagree with the idea that there should be um, that a society should go over what it considers moral, what morals make a society. What should be considered a moral action or immoral, um, and there should be reasons to maintain certain things for keeping keeping a civilization the way it wants to be kept, and maybe reconsidering what it considers moral or ethical, if it seems to be making things a net worse. I don't know if we're totally at that point. Um, I think maybe we are. I don't know. I certainly wouldn't necessarily go out of my way to suggest that Heinlein's vision is the absolute route to go. I think there's room for debate there, um, because whippings seem kind of unpleasant. They certainly don't look like fun, and I can't imagine they feel great. Um, Getting spanked and swatted, as a child was enough for me to be like, no, I'm pain averse. I, that's motivation enough for me. But no, there's. I'm not saying I'm not saying whether or not he brings up valid points. I think there are questions. I realize how namby-pamby that sounds. Um, I'm not saying we live currently in a state of complete moral degeneration. I think I think there are some distinct failings of our justice system to keep up with to mete out justice in a way that seems equitable. Um, that's more a personal opinion than anything. Um, Cabbage in the attic. Well, at least you weren't given the mushroom treatment. And I'll never say that I didn't deserve the. Anytime I got punished, I definitely deserved it. Like there was no overdoing, and I think that's kind of the fine line. Is
pe- maybe Heinlein's right, and there's like a general fear of inflicting punishment when it isn't warranted. I don't know. I don't know. I'm gonna snatch you bald headed. Yes, absolutely. No, it's and times have changed. And maybe we don't need anything like that anymore. I don't know. I don't have a kid, so I don't have that particular dilemma. Um, maybe if when I do, my opinion will change or not. I have no idea. Um, I have other concerns at the moment. um, but it's I don't know. It's a toughie. Um, I don't feel like society is completely crumbling around us due to the actions of say juvenile delinquents. Left ask my mom at a restaurant, did his mama snatch a ball? Yes, absolutely. Well, you don't know. Maybe it might have happened. Um, this is what could happen. As a kid, you certainly don't know. And if the threat has been applied, then there's a possibility in your heart of hearts. Um, I don't know. I feel like I might be coming dangerously close to soapboxing. I do feel like uh, the current push towards people using AI in its current implementation, these large language models, and just the very laissez-faire attitude with using it without what seems like any kind of oversight. Um, and people like going on a chat GPT to ask it actual questions. I'm like, no, don't do that. Don't ask it questions. It doesn't know the answer to your goddamn question. Or this Google AI, and that's obviously doing all the news right now is, the Google trying to become like a closed environment, which I shouldn't have to explain how stupid an idea that is. Okay, so we're soapboxing now. We've transitioned into full soapbox mode, um, like a transforming mecha. We're going into soapbox mode. So, quick diatribe about this whole Google search AI thing. Um, so I don't know who was around when Google first came onto the scene, but at the time it was one of your best options for uh, having searching the internet for what you wanted to find. Um, it was arguably better than most of its competition um, for a search engine, which is to say that a lot of the competition sucked at the time, if you can believe it. It wasn't very good. Suffice it to say, Google has gotten markedly worse over the years as their business model has been uh, the way it's become, which is if you pay Google money, they bump you up in priority for searches. Now, here's the thing with them doing their current pivot to using AI. So, what you were doing before using a Google search, um, personally, right now, I use DuckDuckGo because I'm actually more likely to find what I'm looking for than Google half the time. I don't have to go through multiple pages. Um, uh, and maybe if there's a better search engine out there, please somebody clue me into it. I will happily use that. Uh, and of course now part of their model is harvesting your metadata the entire time, so that they're like, oh, what are you searching? Well, now we know this tidbit about you. Yes, as Derpy Shark says, it is unreal how bad other search engines were before Google came on the scene. It is like, if you weren't there, you truly cannot understand how bad it was until you compare current era Google with like anything that's slightly better for finding what you want without like a million like bits of garbage in your first search. I admit that a bit of Google foo or search engine foo goes a long way in this regard, but it's gotten harder and harder to do that. If you want a perfect example of how awful it is to find something on modern internet when it's like tracking everything you do, um, is trying to find things on Amazon. It is unbelievably hard unless you have some very specific criteria and data to find what you're looking for. like an ISBN number. Like you need very specific. If you're just going on there looking for things, I, for one, possibly because I have a lot of restrictions on what it's allowed to harvest from me as best I can. Like I'm not logged into the thing before I use it, um, or any of that. I have great difficulty finding what I'm looking for. I find it's actually worse when I'm logged in trying to find things. Anyway, let's get back to the core diatribe and why Google transitioning, and other people have said this better than I have, so I'm going to muddle through. So the current Google model, or the Google model that is being pivoted right now, is basically to create Google as a closed ecosystem. Now, think about how Google has worked. GitHub Copilot is most scarily psychic in guessing my code. Oh no. Um, I will have to look at that. Look into that. Um, so up until now, Google, when you're searching for something, has been getting money from people who are trying to make their trying to cut through the signal to noise ratio, to have more signal to noise, so that they, to get noticed. They'll pay Google, and Google will give higher, incrementally higher priority to someone searching for something in the general realm of what that thing is. Or not, as the case may be. Not, something wholly unrelated, which is largely the problem. Um, the problem with Google making a closed ecosystem where they don't have to worry about other people making content, but Google's AI will make the content for them, is that now Google becomes pure bullshit. Because that is all that a large language model can produce. It is not capable of giving you a straight answer to something because it doesn't fucking know. Pardon my French. I like seals. Le fuck. It does not know. It is completely incapable of knowing. It doesn't have the ability to know that it is wrong. People using it should know that, and yet all the time I'm seeing people go and be like, well, I asked ChatGPT this and it gave me instructions. And then I'm like, you really expect any of those to work? If they do work, it's a mere goddamn call. There is no way they should work, except that it's copying it from somewhere else. Now here's the problem. Thus we transition to the issue. If it's generating all its own hallucinations, and basically mentally masturbating the entire time, you get nothing. You get nothing. You cannot get a valid result from a Google search. And we're seeing that pretty much immediately. Like the stuff it's dragging stuff from, like the thing of trying to make perfect pizza cheese using Elmer's glue. The stuff about, oh, well, if you're feeling stressed, you should just jump off a bridge. That sort of thing. Anybody with two neurons to rub together knew that this, and who knew anything about the AI, how large language models behave before now, and if they didn't, they're forgiven if they have more than two, um, would have known that this is the kind of thing that you'd get. It's not. Um, it's even goes beyond thinking it's sentient in any way, and becomes about like just understanding that this thing isn't by design. It's not really. If it's gonna give you an accurate answer to something, it's largely by chance. It's luck. It's basically luck of the draw that it's going to find something that's relevant, and you see that with these Google AI returns that are like, what? That's counterproductive. You should go out and kill somebody. That doesn't seem like a valid solution to the problem. Excuse me? Pardon? Um, so like I had a thread. I had a narrative thread here, and I'm losing it. Because I'm impassioned, and when I'm impassioned, I lose it. And it's like, okay, Google can go ahead and do this. Yes, it can be trained. And how are they training? Yes, okay, this is where the thread was getting. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I am so glad I have people like you tuning in because you keep me on. Um, so this is the way a large language model is trained. You have a body that is seeing its results, a person, an actual thinking creature with agency.
and it is saying you can't say this, and then removing its ability to say this, something that pops up that it spews forth that is wrong. Now, so that should give a bunch of alarm bells. There's a bunch of alarm bells. One, because that means you need a workforce of people who are doing only that all the time. Two, that means you have to have rules that are enforced. It implies that they have them, but you don't know who's enforcing those rules. Now, there is this great article that someone sent me not so long ago. Oh, that's the wrong page. Do I have a link to it? I might not. Um, I believe it was in Kenya. Where are you? I should have it here. No, no. Yes! Uh, Kenyans were trying to teach ChatGPT to recognize offensive text. Suffice it to say, um, it's not great for the people who have to do that job. Like you hear occasionally horror stories of people who have to do moderation for, say, Facebook and whatnot over the years. Yes, Microsoft's Tay chatbot is a lesson. This is exactly the problem you have to deal with. Is now solving that problem is kind of a it leads to Tay, and the way large language models are having to be trained now is kind of, in a way, symptoms, in that I think there should be inducements for people to, and maybe punishments, I don't know, for people to behave well on the internet. Um, I don't know what form those have to take. The bar has to be raised in some way because it's really bad. Also, you shouldn't be letting certain people, and at the very least, you shouldn't be letting certain people get access to those things. Making these large language models open source seems like a baffling idea precisely because of Tay. Like, Tay AI is like the poster child for why you shouldn't be letting the public, the broader internet using public, at these things, because you need to be chaperoning these if you want them to be useful. They're not useful. Now, I can tell you, I can make solid speculations as to why there isn't as much oversight as there should be. It's because these companies feel that this is the next big thing. This is the big thing. You have to be doing the AI research, or you're going to be left behind in the dust because somebody's going to create a closed environment that everybody will just love. It'll be great, and nobody will want to leave, and we'll all be shut out. That's, I believe, the running theory. That your Amazons, that your Googles, that your Apples, that your who's the other big one that's doing it? Anyway, that all these companies are going for is, oh, we don't want to get locked out. Yes, the video portal between Ireland and New York, another case in point. Um, there's some rule somewhere that if uh, I think it's usually attributed to people playing a video game, but I think it's attributable to anything. With any form of creative medium, one of the first things that's ever going to be done is somebody is going to draw a genital. It's going to. It's going to happen. People won't behave. Um, People don't behave. Um, it makes one think that maybe Heinlein was onto something when he was saying, "Oh, there is no moral impulse, moral instinct." I happen to generally believe that's true already pre-Heinlein, um, because you know, if you're not given a reason, anyway. Uh, I'm not saying all children are psychopaths, because I don't believe they are. I believe they learn pretty quickly. Certainly, they wouldn't be clinical psychopaths because that requires like altered wiring, as it were, or chemistry, as the case may be. So I don't believe that's true. I know some people have gone that far, and I think that's kind of where Heinlein is going. Is basically people are born psychotic, and they need to be, they need to be beaten into shape. And I'm like, I don't know if that's entirely true. I think there's a bunch of impulses that come together that basically say, hey, this is a bunch of genetic memory that we've had forever that says being in a group and functioning within a group is useful, therefore you will do it. That sort of makes everybody just being psychopaths off rip kind of unlikely. Um, but that's me speculating.
I had another further endpoint. Oh yes. Related to them being trained and how you can't tell them this is a good response per se, is my understanding. You can only tell these large language models this is a bad response. And basically remove it from their vocabulary, which makes them even more lobotomized than they otherwise would be. Not that they would have anything resembling a mind to begin with. Um, they don't. It also leads to a further, at least people. This is a sprawling diatribe, so you're gonna have to bear with me as I hop around a bit. This also leads to a broader problem. Uh, so tied to people thinking of them as sentient. Um, if anybody has read on those stories of dating chatbots, where like you just have a personal companion that's a chatbot, and they grow extremely attached to them. And I know there was one somewhere there where people it got updated to not do certain things, and people got really disappointed because it felt a lot less human. Um, which is what happens when there's an update and you change what it can do as a response, and it becomes a bit more canned as a result. Uh, we imprint on things. That's clearly got a evolutionary impetus behind it um, for tribal or group social mechanics. It's definitely there. But we imprint on things. We anthropomorphize. We try to apply our own values to something that doesn't necessarily have them. And these large language models are a great example. If you hooked one of these up to, I mean, hell, there was that guy who was supposed to rate one as being Turing compliant and sentient, and he was like absolutely convinced it was a real sapient being. It's like, no, it can't. It physically doesn't have, not even physically. It just simply can't be. And I'm not saying, you know, that there's no soul there because there isn't. But it's not designed to do that. It's not designed to think. It's designed to give call and response. It's not it's the problem you run into with the what's that called? The Chinese room problem. The state machine like barrier negates the natural learning. Yeah, it can't. It can't learn the way we do. And the way it's being used, it can't really think in the way we do. And it never could because it doesn't have any of the hardware that would necessitate it thinking like we do. Um, but beyond that, the way it has to be taught things isn't the way we learn things, and it can't really because it is a glorified search engine at the end of the day. And the problem, curving all the way back, with Google setting up their little closed environment using Google AI, is you're taking what was previously a very profitable system for Google, not necessarily the rest of us, but for Google, of get paid to get exposure, and being like, hey, we don't want any of the things, we don't want to have to, the people who are paying us for exposure, we want to cut them out. I don't know why. We want to just generate our own content somehow. Um, Seems to be the angle they're going with, and it makes no goddamn sense. Absolutely none. It makes no sense. So there's this crazy frenzy going on, and we're not even touching on how unbelievably destructive and wasteful these AI things are in terms of their resource consumption. We're not touching on that because that's like 2 hours of diatribe. We're not doing it. I don't have the energy. I'm sorry. Um, it's bad. Um, it's very bad. Some people I think maybe are blowing it even are saying it's worse than it might actually be. I've heard allegories of basically anytime you use, say, one of what's the art one? I had it in my head. It's gone now. Somebody said that doing one of the generative art AI ones has claimed that giving it a prompt, any prompt, anytime it pops up a result, is the equivalent of taking like a bottle of water, an 8-ounce bottle of water, pouring it out on the ground, and it's gone. I don't believe that's entirely true, um, but I don't know the math yet. I think that's pretty learnable. I mean, when you've got There was a server farm in Europe, I want to say Switzerland, and they were hooked up to a hydro dam, generating hydroelectric generating station, and they basically were monopolizing it. And so nearby residents weren't getting juice. I think that might have been resolved. I don't know for sure. I need to look that up again. Uh, so that might now be anecdotal, but and apocryphal or nigh apocryphal in that it's been resolved and no longer an issue. But suffice it to say, these things are burning juice in a way that makes crypto seem positively eco-friendly, uh, because of the amount of resources being dumped into this that is being wholly promoted by these companies that are massive financial juggernauts in their own right. Um, and like to if you think that they have your best interests at heart, if you think that they have any motive beyond get bigger, consume, and become larger entity, then I am sorry, you haven't been paying attention. Um, if you want a good hell, those were written before crypto and AI. But if you want a good example of where we're headed, you should check out the Rifters trilogy by by Peter Watts in terms of brownouts and enforced power consumption stuff. Is yeah, there could be an issue. We might have to start setting up geothermal uh, power substations, collecting stations on the ocean floor. It's, I mean, I don't think we're going to have time to get that hooked up between now and like 2050, 2075 when things are going to get real nasty. But yeah, I think we have much to look forward to. To sound callously and casually racist without wanting to, the ancient Oriental curse of may you live in interesting times is very firmly upon us. Move the computer to the moon and use solar power. I like this idea. Um, but then you have to worry about it having a beaming signal strong enough to get through the Earth's atmosphere from the moon, and not. I don't. And you. There's nothing you can do about the light speed delay there, which is minimal to the moon. It's what, seconds? Seconds to the moon. I know it's okay. It's 8 minutes to Earth. That's 1 AU. Earth to Mars is hours, I think. Moon is fraction of 1 AU, so it's like, I don't know. Isn't it like 7 seconds? I don't know why I have that number in my head. That's probably wrong. It's not very long, but it would be. It's measurable in seconds. Oh, jeez, that hurts. It's measurable in seconds. Now maybe that's overcomable with some sort of a fancy relay or better transmission technology that I'm not even thinking of. Um, Suffice it to say, if you move it to the moon and have it do its own thing up there, somebody's going to ask the $1 million question, which is inevitably, what's the fucking point? And that's my question. What's the fucking point? What are we getting out of this large language model AI push? What are we getting out of it? What's the idea? Where do we, Joe Schmoes on the ground, and Jane Schmoes, maybe they're Schmoettes, I don't know. What are people getting out of it? Oh, you get to have a bunch of people create artworks that couldn't otherwise because they have no talent, or I don't know, maybe they're missing their limbs. I don't know. I don't know if anybody's used that argument yet as a thumbs up reason why AI generated art is okay. Is, oh, well, there's this guy, he's actually got a brilliant artistic mind, but he can't physically make any art. So using an AI, using prompts, using one of those either voice commands or what have you, is the only way he can create art. You'd be missing out on that artist. I can't believe I've just come up with an argument in favor of AI generated art. I hate myself right now. I'm so angry. I'm infuriated that I would come up with an argument. Nobody used that. Local arm chips with massive computer. Yeah, call the moon the cloud. I do like this idea in theory. But ultimately, it comes back to why have the energy expenditure to begin with? And also, somebody's going to keep wanting to expand that thing, and do we really want to keep doing that? Suffice it to say, uh, things aren't great. And I don't see any reasonable regulation being put in place anytime soon because the people in charge of setting up regulation are A, hopelessly out of date or out of touch with the technologies involved. I can't draw for shit either. I live with it. I comprehend the fact that I'm not a creative type. I understand this. You can call what I'm doing here an act of creation. I don't. Um, I don't consider myself a content creator. Technically, I'm creating content. Technically, I'm creating content for Pappy Google, which is not great, but they're also not paying me. So I also can slag them off, and if they ding me algorithmically, fuck them. Let them. They can go right ahead. I was never planning to make money off this anyway. Joke's on them. Problem is, they're making money off of it, so that's sort of the issue. So really, I'd have to set up my own. Oh, we're not going there. Anyway, I had some clever, pithy bit of wisdom to interject, which wasn't all that pithy or clever. It's gone now. Is it gone? It's gone. Yeah. Anyway, why? You know, I'm not a creative type. I accept this. I appreciate the hell out of people who are, because otherwise I wouldn't get cool books to read. I like that. I wouldn't get cool art or music to look at or listen to. I wouldn't get what have you, thing that I enjoy aesthetically for the sake of enjoying something aesthetically. Um, I don't find AI art to often be all that aesthetically pleasing, partly because it's trying to be too aesthetically pleasing. Um, my wife is an artist, and helps, since we both think the other creates magic. Absolutely. And that's a great functioning working relationship. That's the way it should be, man. And it's just bonkers to me. It's what's really frustrating is with AI generated art specifically is people who are like, and I realize this is turning into a what grinds my gears, um, is people who are like, oh well, AI generated art is just a medium, and I'm like, no, it's not. That might be technically true on some level, but it's not you making the art. You are you are a large language model wrangler at that point. That's what you're doing. You're not creating a goddamn thing that it's not stealing from someone else already on some level. So I don't feel that argument holds weight. Again, I haven't heard the argument that somebody with no physical ability to create art is using AI generated art to make art, and that's good. I don't think I've heard that argument. Prompt engineer. There we go. That man. If I ever hear some, okay, I'm so infuriated at seeing that. I like that. I appreciate that. Any of the actual engineers I know would probably be like, excuse me. Pardon, but sure, prompt engineer works. I bet there's people who are actually doing that. I don't doubt it. I don't doubt it for an instant. Wow, I have rambled for a solid 30 minutes. We're going to cut that off. I'm sorry. Frag getting angry time is over now. Frag be happy now. That's like turning in Moby Dick and calling it feels distressing, particularly once you understand how these AI art generators work. It's like that's all from somewhere else. It's recombining things, but it's like it can't vomit forth a new idea. Now, I'm not saying human beings can vomit forth a new idea on command. Typically, we can't. In fact, we've gone through a lot of the original ideas at this point because we know they exist. They're known quantities. It is physically incapable, well, fundamentally incapable of coming up with an original idea because it is not programmed to do that. You can tell it to use elements in such a way that it has been trained to go for, but that's not the same thing. Even if like a person has an idea that turns out, after they've gone through with the idea, to have not been original, or the first time this idea has popped up, they still came to it on their own, using their own agency, which one of these devices, these programs, simply doesn't have. They have zero agency. So what I'm saying is, like certain people, um, I think we need to discount the opinions of AIs. I mean, until we can get a legal framework, which we don't have. Um, so yeah, back to my point about the people who are supposed to be. Yeah, so we're gonna get angry again. I'm sorry. This happens. I had a point, then I lost it, and then I found it again. The whole thing about the people who are supposed to be overseeing this being hopelessly unqualified for the task, and even if they aren't hopelessly unqualified for the task, are in many cases not. They are actively disincentivized from making regulations or a legal framework for the control and I said regulation already. The control and regulation of AIs or large language models. They're not. They're not uh, because certain people pay their bills. They're given. They're lobbied. You know, who has massive numbers of lobbyists? Let's see. The tech industry. So they're going to be they're going to be voting with their wallet, voting to keep politicians doing politician things. What I'm saying is we need a pretty dramatic overhaul in the way we think about these things, and we're not doing it. And I don't think it requires much imagination. I do think conceiving of these things not being conducive to a stable society, which is where our original point was, and the breakdown of society as a result of AI, because we're moving in to a okay, so we've gone past a post-truth reality where the truth sort of seems to not matter anymore. I know. Well, he's more of an off umber, I think now. He's looking rather sickly indeed. Um, he doesn't look great. One thinks that the scintilla of justice might actually, which I honestly didn't think was going to happen, but I'm happy it did. We'll see. Um, back to find the thread. Find the thread. It's so tenuous. You're so close. So we're certainly because of certain orange creatures that I would never compare to an orangutan because an orangutan has more in common with me than that entity does. Um, Fundamentally more. uh, I can relate to an orangutan. I can't, not that thing. We're sort of living in a post-truth reality where the truth doesn't matter, but we're rapidly approaching a post-reality reality where uh, like a consensus reality so far is not only difficult to achieve but completely impossible because everybody's going to be living in their own AI generated wonder world. Like anytime I see someone post like a chat GPT search that they put in, what is the answer to such and such, I'm like, no, you can't do that. It's fundamentally anathema to having a consistent consensus reality. It's the exact opposite. The exact opposite of the world we're living in. Like you can't do that because it cannot give you that answer. You need to do some of the work yourself. It can't supply it to you, and that might mean you have to think about something for 5 minutes. And that it's like, oh, someone's creating, a fake Monet or a fake Van Gogh painting, using AI generated art. Oh, wow, that's cool. This is what Van Gogh would have done if he thought about spaceships. It's like, okay, cool, but objection, Your Honor, relevance. You know, I'm digging myself a hole here, I think. We're in a rabbit warren now. I'm looking for the place where they keep, you know, the food in the rabbit warren. I think they have food in rabbit warrens. Do they have food in rabbit warrens? I don't actually know. I think that's ants. That's ants. We have delved into the ant hill. They've got their little food storage area. I'm looking for that. Um, I think my blood sugar is getting low. I don't know. Um, Oh, here, I was talking about that Kenyan workers with the Chat GPT thing. I'll just post that. Um, I actually found this cute article. I think it was in the New York. It was written by Anthony Lane, who often writes for the New Yorker. I don't know if it was in the New Yorker offhand. About um, something called Blinkist. This is very tangentially related. A colleague was using ChatGPT to complete our HR online training. Oh, fuck me. That's the shit I don't like to hear. That stuff's very upsetting to me. The thing that's really funny about using ChatGPT and similar to do that is all the checks and balances in place to check if that's being done involve using another large language model that doesn't get it right because it can't get it right. It's not capable. It is not fundamentally able to check and balance itself. Now, there's another article that I found. Actually, that one was also sent to me. I shouldn't say I found it. Um, where you can actually find certain identifiers because with the advent of ChatGPT and these large language models, there has been a 200% plus uptick in certain words in the English lexicon being used that weren't before. Now, unfortunately, I use a bunch of them on the daily. This is an issue because now I sound like an AI, or retroactively. Let me see if I can find that one. Where are you? Words. No, 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 no. That's too old. Detect AI text. There we go. Here we go. Um, where are you? There's been, for instance, there has been a 200% growth in the appearance of the word delve on the internet from 2022. Delve is now being used a lot. People are using you're seeing the word delve on the internet frequently. Other words that have had a similar bump, intricacies and unwavering. I'm going to post this article, it's cute. Um, this one gets my goat because unfortunately, I believe I have used the word unwavering and intricacies more than once, possibly on these. Um, Maybe I have used delve. I know the word delve. I have used the word delve. I don't know if I've used it on stream. Wow. Yeah, so some of these are pretty striking as graphs. They're not perfect. Well, these are pretty good line graphs. Yeah, it's more than 200%. It went up uh, in the air RXIV, RXIV database of 2.3 million plus papers. Delve went from, call that 80, eyeballing it. It's just shy 100 instances uh, from 2021 up over the course of 2022 up to over 1,000 instances of the word delve. The Chat GPT came out right when this happened. So here's another delightful little article on how you can sort of identify AI text. So if you're ever wondering if something was AI generated, say you're having an argument on the internet, and you want to know if they're, oh, here we go, labyrinthian mazes. That's another one. I think I've used labyrinthian. I don't think I've said labyrinthian mazes because that's redundant. Why would I do that? I'm not redundant. I'm at least a little redundant. I say fictional a lot. Well, I say fictional in the context of a fictional novel being fictional with fictional characters, and they have fictional views. well, they're real for the. They're not. We're not going that far down the rabbit hole. The anthill. Yes, we're using ant colonies now, not rabbit warrens. Ant colonies. Anyway, people can enjoy those. I know they upset me rather a lot, but I just get angry. Yeah, it's like the Kenya article is gets dark fast, and you're like, oh Jesus. But it's a really good eye opener for how you have to wrangle these things so that they can do what you deem is acceptable and not just give forth monstrous vomit. Like they're already it's all vomit. Like it's all just regurgitated nonsense. But like this is how they have to keep them in line. It's by saying you can't say that. You can't say that and removing its ability to say that. If it could say that it would because it doesn't care. It doesn't care. You're not saying, "Oh, well, say this if you want to, but you shouldn't." No, it's like so if you want to get started on if you even want to conceive of these things as sentient, which you shouldn't, it's not healthy, they're not. The way we're treating them would therefore be a crime, or should be a crime against sentient life, because removing its ability to say something is, fairly basic when it comes to freedom of speech. Um, Etc. But it's not, so it's not an issue. Well, here's the issue with if the model can't already tell, then hit reset. Is A, it can't tell. B, the issue is that it's interacting with people all over the internet, and people are interacting with the thing and not in good faith. How this continues to happen in the wake and advent of Tay AI, who knows? Is as was brought up before, it was kind of clear at that point that this would be a problem, and it continues to be. So here we are. I've given enough blather. I have talked way too long. Why are you trying to tell me to do that? I'm not doing that. Oh, they released a new album. Why am I getting bombarded with things? I should not go on the internet. Um, I'm gonna go. I will see you all Wednesday. I was going to do one from Instantiation, but I found a cute article, as I was alluding to before I got sidetracked, which I do a lot. Sorry. Um, an article by Anthony Lane about a service app, what have you, called Blinkist, which maybe people have heard of. I hadn't. I did not know it existed because I'm not in the app ecosystem. I avoid it. Um, I have a phone. Technically, it's a smartphone, but I've done a good job of making sure it's a stupid smartphone. But it's about an application that summarizes. Uh, application app/service that summarizes. And Anthony Lane has an entertaining way with language. And of course, he's someone who is probably keeping very close track as somebody who writes frequently incisive articles and observations, who would definitely their ass is on the line. Let's say they are on the front line when it comes to AI possibly being deeply problematic, large language models being deeply problematic for their continued employment. There's a few allusions to that, so he is aware of that issue. So I'll probably be doing that this Wednesday. It's a reasonably long article. We'll see how long it takes, and then we'll figure it out from there. Otherwise, Wednesday will, for the next couple weeks, be given over to reading installments of Instantiation, as well as Fridays, because the short stories are pretty smallish, and my time to read on these streams isn't necessarily as large as it used to be, though to see the length of this one, you wouldn't know it, considering how long I've blathered. Um, After that, for Wednesdays, after we get through Instantiation, I have a cute little treat, and then I will figure out what I'm doing after we get through that cute little treat. Um, I've talked about the cute little treat before, but it's been months, um, and I'm trying to keep it on the down low, so it seems almost like a surprise. Suffice it to say, if you twist your mind a little bit, it fits sort of into the Wuxia Wednesdays thing that I had done for the last month or two. Um, we'll see. Fridays after instantiation is done, Fridays will be given over to um, first Destination Void by Frank Herbert, then The Three Body Problem by Xixin Liu, then The Jesus Incident by Frank Herbert and Bill Ransom, then The Dark Forest by Xixin Liu, then The Lazarus Effect by Frank Herbert and Bill Ransom, then I think it's Death's End is the third name of the third volume by Xixin Liu, and then whatever the fourth volume of Destination Void is, I can't remember. The Ascension Factor, also by Frank Herbert and Bill Ransom. So yeah, y'all have fun. Thanks to everybody who tuned in. If you have not, here we go into fully roach spiel. If you haven't tuned in before, and you're wondering why these are so rough and why he's just making mouth noises, completely unassisted, and you're wondering why there's no camera to see him make mouth noises unassisted, guess what? You're not going to get the camera. It's not happening. I'm not an ogre, but you're not getting it. It's because I do these live, in front of a possibly live audience. I assume. I mean, I'm having reasonably original interactions with people. If it is an AI that is pretending to be a person, a large language model that's pretending to be a person, frankly, I don't possess the guts or skill to quite notice yet. So I guess it's a bump to my ego. So you can tune into me live on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays starting at 12 noon Eastern Time or UTC -5 if you are from any sane part of the world. Um, that should be able to get you the right timing, which I acknowledge isn't perfect, but you'll make do. Um, I just lost my train of thought. That's cool. Choo choo. It goes on without me. I am the caboose. Uh, where were we? Right. Other than that, all my stuff is archived on the YouTube. I think yeah, I completely forgot. I'll have to do that today. Sugar. I meant to this weekend get everything updated for the transition to the month, the June month, and they're all archived on the YouTube, which should be in the link, linked in the stream description. With that, I'm gonna go. Stay safe, stay sane, and be decent to each other. I'll have the playlists updated by this weekend. Alrighty, see y'all later. Bye. Have a good one. Sorry I rambled for an inordinate amount of time, like an hour. Until next time, toodles.